What's up, guys? Today we're gonna learn finger spring. Before we get started though, I want to talk about the two main types of springs. There's two main types, right? There's a finger spring and then there's a thumb spring. A thumb spring. Ooh, of course. Today we're gonna learn the finger spring, which is probably the most important spring and probably most important flourish you could ever learn. Although the thumb spring allows for technically a bigger spring, there are three really important reasons to learn the finger spring. Number one, it's going to help with other tricks such as pressure fans, as well as a lapel spread. Also, it's loud. Thumb spring, not that loud, much louder. It helps with what's known as the approach, which is walking up to a group of strangers and getting their attention all at once. And the last reason, it's super duper reliable. Once you learn it, it's really hard to mess it up. Unlike the thumb spring, a little bit easier to mess up sometimes. So grab some cards, preferably bicycle, and let's get started. Also, stay till the end of the video, especially if you're having trouble with this, because if you are, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks that will help you tremendously. Alright guys, let's talk about the spring. So, let's go over hand position first. So your catching hand is going to be most important. Your catching hand is going to stay in mechanic's grip. And the reason for that is when you spring the cards, if you don't have this finger here, the cards are going to shoot past them and onto the floor. Now the other part of the grip is going to be this hand. Now this hand is where all the action happens, and it's the most complex of what's going on. So you're going to want to hold these in biddle grip. Now you do not want to hold them out jogged, or you'll get a much harder to do spring. You want to be almost centered with your finger. So you want your middle finger about equidistant of where your pinky is. So the same amount of space here should be over here as well. Your thumb, on the other hand, should kind of be, you're going to notice it's going to be naturally more onto one side. I'm right-handed, so it's more on the left side here. So we can get another view here. The other part that's going to be important is the distance that your fingers are. So with a thumb spring, you're way up here. With a finger spring, your fingers are near the top here. Because ideally, what's going on is it's going to slip off these fingers up here. Once you get here, so you're about equal distant, your thumb is more on one side, your fingers are much more flush with the deck. Now, if you're squeezing and nothing is happening, push with your thumb up this way and see if they fly off. If they still don't, adjust your fingers back a little bit. You don't want it barely holding on. If I have them so they're barely holding on, it's a little bit harder to do the spring, but you want it so as you start squeezing, those cards will start flying off. So we start here. You'd see a very little space here, a lot more space down here. Squeeze, and they start coming off. Now, the squeeze itself kind of has an art to it. You're going to squeeze together. You're basically driving your thumb up this direction, and you're squeezing your fingers. The force is going down this direction. So they're kind of at an angle towards each other at first. As you start getting through the cards, you'll notice that the angle my hand starts to change. As I squeeze and the force goes this way and this way, I want to keep the force going that way. So what I do is I bend my fingers. So if you see how my thumb curls out like this, it's not straight like my finger. If your fingers could do what your thumb does, you want that feeling, like almost like you're trying to push your fingers to do what your thumb is doing, and at the same time squeeze your fingers. So it's a weird feeling, but when you get to the end of the spring, you're kind of pushing out with your muscles like this. So, right, you're trying to push out like this, but at the same time, your fingers are coming together. So if you think about your hand as two portions, right? So I have a hinge here, and a hinge here, and I have a hinge here, and I have a hinge here. These hinges are going out, and these hinges are coming in, right? So I'm going in with the fingers and I'm trying to almost pull out. Really, I'm just keeping them super, super straight. So I get this at the end. But that happens at the end. That's the weird part to get used to, and it's at the last couple cards. So if you can't get used to that, start by doing half the deck, stopping, and going. Now, I guess I should mention, when you do start this, you're going to start with clumps. That's fine. What you're going to want to do is practice it this way first. You're going to want to hold your hand very close in that mechanic's grip and just squeezing them off into your hand. Now, at first, it's going to look like this, because your hand is trying to get used to the slow, methodic motion. What this means is happening is that your fingers are stopping the motion. When you see it smooth, your fingers are being consistent. So when you start, it is easier to just do this faster than slower. You'll notice if you go fast, you can usually do it fairly easy. So what you're going to want to do is start to slow it down. So try to go slower and slower until you get that nice, smooth rhythm. Once you get the smooth rhythm down, what you're going to want to do is what my hand just did. You're going to want to go out and come back. So watch. Like that. You're going to go out and come back. Just a little bit. Your goal distance is just as far as you can get until the point where cards start flipping over in the deck. So if you go really far, well, once you practice this for a while, it is harder to get those cards to flip over. Maybe if I do it sideways. I guess not. But as you do it, you'll notice that cards are starting to flip. What that usually means is you're holding the deck wrong. You're holding it over a little bit too much. And you're trying to usually do a weird angle. So you're seeing my hand go forward. It's actually going forward and down. Forward and down. Well, it's almost like a 45-degree angle to the floor. Like that. Then the goal after that point is just getting it as big as you possibly can. The spring is super important because just with minor adjustments, you can do other things like pressure or pressure fans. Okay, so let's go into some of the tips and tricks on how to do this. So the first tip is what you're going to want to do is if you're still having trouble with this, you can buy something to help you, and that something is just some plastic cards. You can get plastic cards nowadays at Walmart. Bicycle sells their own plastic deck. Now, it might be kind of expensive, but it'll last you forever. I've had these specific deck for 10 years, and these aren't even good plastic cards, right? And the reason you want to get plastic cards is if I take a plastic card, you'll notice how flat that is. No matter how much I bend it, unlike a normal card, it doesn't hold its bend at all. It always goes back straight, which means that when this makes this process much harder to spring. It is much harder to spring these smoothly because you have to have so much more hand control. But at the same time, these cards are weaker. They are much easier to bend like this. So the whole deck, you can bend it with probably just your pinky. And what that means for you is you won't get that cramp in your hand that most people do after doing a lot of springing. And my hand's already feeling it, and I do this a lot. So it'll help you build up that strength because it'll be a little bit easier. And it'll help you build up the smoothness that you need. So what you want to really do is switch between this and your regular deck. Work on doing it all the same processes I show you with the plastic deck, and then switching back to the bicycle. And you're going to find that it's a lot easier. The other tip that I can give you is just rest. Let your hand chill. You're going to feel like you have carpal tunnel, especially in these couple fingers here, after a while, because your hand is just not used to this much strain because you're flexing every muscle in your hand at once, and you're doing it real specifically. So what you're going to want to do is simply do it over and over and rest, almost like you're going to the gym. If you ever go to the gym, you lift, you have to rest. If you don't rest, your muscles don't build. You want these muscles to build. The spring does take time. It takes, I would say, about 2 weeks to get it to where you can do it in a manner that you find satisfactory. And then it takes months after that to get it really, really good, to where you can get it to go farther and farther and farther. By the way, before we continue, I should mention, if you are finding any of these tips helpful, make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. Make sure to give it a like if you found this useful, and to subscribe, because next week we're going to go over how to do the thumb spring. But not just the thumb spring, but the giant thumb spring. The largest spring that you can possibly do with a deck of cards. You know, anaconda size thumb spring. Other than that, I'll see you later.